The most intense portion of a jury trial for me, and there are a couple different parts of this, but the most intense is watching the jury foreperson walk into the courtroom. Now, some people say, well, what about when they stand up? And I get that because, you know, the verdict's about to be read, but actually I look at them well beforehand. And there's something I do even in the voir dire, the jury selection, is I try to figure out, and as much as I can, help pick or predict who the foreperson's going to be. And in North Carolina, we still give them a piece of paper and an envelope. It's normally a yellow envelope, and the clerk prints out the different verdict options. And when you see the foreperson walk in from the jury room, there's normally a door towards the back of the courtroom, or excuse me, the front of the courtroom behind the judge or near the judge. And you see the person holding that envelope. First of all, you know who your foreperson is. And that can inform what you think the verdict may or may not be. I try to pick the foreperson to lead the conversation. If you don't do that, I think that's a mistake. But that's something I learned at some continuing legal education. You try to pick your foreperson. And my accuracy rate of choosing who's actually going to be selected, because it's a secret vote amongst the jurors, is pretty accurate. I actually give myself a B+ on that. Occasionally I get it wrong, but most of the time I get it right. But when they walk in the courtroom and they sit down and everyone settles, you know, people walking in and out of the courtroom, and our jury boxes tend to be tight, so there's some shuffling going around, there's some noise, and you hear some clanking and clinking with different doors. Maybe they bring your client in from custody, and maybe they're wearing chains and they're handcuffed or at that time. And it gets really quiet, and then the judge normally turns, whatever way the jury is, and says, do we have a verdict? And will you have the foreperson rise? They normally say, will the foreperson please rise, and say, do you have a verdict? When they're opening that envelope and they say, yes, we have a verdict. And when I say they, I mean the judge. They say, hand the envelope to the deputy. And there's a formalized process where they hand it to the deputy. And then the deputy hands it to the clerk, who normally hands it to the judge. And it gets my heart going even thinking about this, but when the judge opens it up and they're reading the verdict, and they know what the verdict is, and I'm sitting there and just going, what is the verdict? What is the verdict? And then they hand it back to the jury and they say, ladies and gentlemen, jury, you report that the defendant, and there's this whole process where they name the defendant out and the case number, and they go one by one in North Carolina. And it is high drama, intense, hearing that name and then having the foreperson say not guilty or guilty. And in many cases, if not most cases, you don't just have one count, meaning you just have one charge of impaired driving, or you have one charge of negligence. They're normally broken up into different portions. And so you have to go through each one and hear it. Is that your verdict? Is that still your verdict? So say you all. And there's this whole process of going through soliloquy, if you will, with the jury and the foreperson. That is the most intense time, watching the jury foreperson rise with the form and hand it to the deputy. And those seconds can feel like years, and the silence is heavier than anything else in this world that I've ever been through. And I have gray hair for a reason. I think several of them are those long pauses.